a few months ago, and so a little longer ago than I intended for the making of this video, I received the Gaia complex from a Kickstarter project by Hansor Publishing. And I said at that time when I did the unboxing video that we'll take a look at the system next. Well, those of you who are waiting patiently or impatiently, now's the time. So this video will take a look at the 12.3 system, which supports play of the Gaia complex. To begin, one of the things that the rules chapter or the system section puts front and center is that we should be looking for opportunities to compare character skill versus the difficulty of the situation that they are in. And if their ability meets or exceeds that challenge, then no roll should be made. Now, this idea exists in a lot of games. It's missed in some pretty important and influential games. It's there, but people don't notice it. So I was very pleased to see in this game how clearly it's stated, right, that if the character is considered skilled enough, no roll should be made. And if the situation is such that stopping to conduct a roll, in other words, inviting the possibility of failure, if that just doesn't really work with the situation that the character is in, again, the game master should waive the roll. So rolls will be made when a significant change, either for the positive or for the negative, is desired, under duress, we could say, or when two characters are facing off against each other and we really don't know which way things are going to go. So there's the notion of calling for rolls when they are necessary, and then recognizing when, in this particular character's case, the roll is not necessary, where it might be for a different character, even a character present among the characters being played at that particular table in that particular game in that particular session. And then there's a caveat saying when it gets in the way, when it's in some way a problem, just bypass the roll altogether. Don't put yourself in the situation as the game master of having what you were trying to set up as a situation or a problem or a scene or a conflict or whatever be prevented from happening because a role that you feel that the rules are calling for is serving as a barrier. Right? So it's an interesting piece of GM advice. Well, how do the rolls actually work? This is a system that uses D12s. So players will be rolling 2 D12s. They do not add together. Each die is considered separately, and they are used to give the characters an opportunity for success. They have 2 chances to get the 1 success that's required if they are skilled in what they're trying to attempt. If they're unskilled, they can still make the attempt, but now both dice need to register a success. If 12s are rolled, well, that die is always a failure, regardless of what is available to the character for modifying dice or what modifiers exist to alter their success. A 12 is always a failure. If you're a skilled character and you roll a success and you roll a 12, which is always a failure, you succeed. If you're an unskilled character, well, you need 2 successes to succeed. So if you roll 1 success and 1 failure, you fail. If you roll 1 success and a 12, well, you fail. If you roll no successes and a 12, you critically fail. If both dice come up 12s, you critically fail, regardless of whether you are skilled or unskilled. So what is a success? When a situation is set up by the game master, it will be assigned a difficulty, and the difficulty can be anywhere from 1 to 11, because 12 is always a failure. And we are rolling under what's called the stat of the character. You're rolling under, which some people can find to be confusing, but I personally like. Rather than rolling at or over a target number, I like to know that the range of success I'm looking for is from the bottom of the die up to whatever that number is. If I see a number larger than that, I failed. Perhaps this is a formative experience brought about by BRP, Call of Cthulhu, and Stormbringer and all that. But this is how it works. So a difficulty number will be set, which we have to meet or roll under in order to gain a success. If we're skilled and gain 1 success, the skill test is passed. We get what we were trying to do. We do what we were trying to do. If we get 2 successes, then we succeed, whether skilled or unskilled, and a skilled character may earn back a point of grit if it's appropriate. And grit is a currency that you can use in the game to adjust die rolls after you have made them. Okay? The more grit you have, the more the character's ability and preparation and positioning apply. All right. Now there's an additional factor. It's not just the setting of a difficulty number. There are also complexity modifiers. This can range from +1 to +3, and it's to the rolled value on the die. So there are certain things in the game which have a set difficulty. Under certain situations, they might be more complex. The situation isn't the normal one where this one is always rolled. It's somehow or in some way worse. And we can make it worse by 1, 2, or 3 on the roll. So a successful roll at or just below the stat of the character might become failure by virtue of this additional obstacle. But another thing that I really like about how the rules are presented is that the game master is advised to reserve these modifiers for particularly difficult situations. So we're not going to roll if the characters have enough time or are not under duress or are operating in their particular area of expertise. We're just not going to roll for those. But in situations where there is stress being applied, where it's possible that failure could happen, then we're going to roll. And we're not going to modify those rolls because that's what's normal for that situation. But then in situations worse than that, we have the opportunity to make things harder. There are also types of skills that are called advanced skills. An advanced skill in a lot of different systems is usually closed off or walled off so that characters who are not trained in that particular type of skill simply cannot perform the role. This is not true in the Gaia complex. You can. However, advanced skill tests are more likely to earn these complexity modifiers we were just talking about, the +1 to +3 difficulty adjustment. So if a situation comes up where we have to attempt these skills, then it's very likely that they're going to be adjusted for being called upon in these kind of circumstances, these dire circumstances. These are the skills that take more time, but you have to do it faster, or they require specialized equipment, but you have to improvise, or people shouldn't really be shooting at you when you're attempting this. So these are things like conducting emergency surgery in a dirty alleyway. Are you going to be successful, or are you going to be introducing deadly foreign bodies into the bloodstream of your patient? Right. So they're more likely to acquire these complexity modifiers. And what I particularly like is that any failure earned by an unskilled character attempting these roles will be considered to be a critical failure. So you can attempt it and you may get a pretty exciting success out of it based on your raw ability, despite your lack of skill. Or you may make things substantially worse. So we've mentioned critical failure a few times. Well, what is critical failure? The game describes critical failure as basically a complication. Other games might describe this as a complication or a setback or some kind of new obstacle that is between you and whatever your objective is when you started to roll the dice in the first place. Guidance is given in the form of a short list. Characters might take physical harm, or characters might take a blow to their morale. They could simply fail the task and not be allowed to attempt it again. They might be put in a dangerous or compromising situation as a result of whatever it was that they were trying to do, because they misunderstand or they're operating under false assumptions or they got bad information or this kind of thing. Or they might have some kind of technical or gear-related failure, right? And this, in a game with as much technology and as much potential for combat as this one, that could be a biggie. But the idea is that you've already failed. You don't, in this moment, achieve what it was that you were going for. But the critical failure is not designed to punish the character, to embarrass the character, to make the table laugh. It's designed to escalate the challenge, right? So if we're in combat and we wind up with a critical failure, this might mean some sort of collateral damage or some unexpected result of the firefight going on around the character has done you harm. Or you might get a completely incorrect read of the battlefield and put yourself in a worse situation. Or the people that you're pursuing might simply escape, right? This kind of thing. So it's all right. It's pretty simple. And this really is the bulk of what we can expect from roles in the 12.3 system. There are a variety of examples provided in the game for how to assess a complexity modifier and how to assign a difficulty and what would be a normal difficulty for things and what all the skills do. But we're rolling 2d12. We're looking to roll under a stat that our character has based on their ability and their skill. 12s are always bad, and modifiers add to what you roll. And that's really it. Now, some of you out there are probably wondering, hey, he talked about grit earlier. Is this one of those systems where there are currencies or meta currencies that need to be spent for specific effects and that sort of thing? Well, yes and no. Yes, there is a so-called meta currency called grit, and this is earned by exceeding the number of successes. So for an unskilled character making a skill test, they won't be earning grit if they are successful. But for a skilled character in an active skill test, they have a chance, right? If they can roll under their stat on both dice, then if the game master agrees that the situation is appropriate, they will earn a point of grit. Well, what's it good for? Two things. This is a game about being able to roll under a target number in terms of how the system accomplishes results. So what grit allows you to do is spend any number of points of grit to adjust the final total of what you've rolled. Right? So if you just missed it by 1 point, you spend a point of grit, and you didn't miss it. Right? The idea here is to reflect the competency of the characters, and to represent that even the most competent characters can be worn down by circumstance and tremendous opposition as time goes on. Another way this is reflected by the system is that characters have morale. So the other thing that grit can be used to do is to replace morale that has been lost due to circumstance. And that's really it. It's not a game where we undo failures or rewrite situations, but it is a game where we can represent through this mechanic, this grit mechanic, we can represent the skill, the timing, the preparation, the toughness, the grit of that character. And we can see it matter in moments with high stakes, and we can also see it being worn away. Pretty interesting, I think. While we're talking about this, I think it's also appropriate at this point in the video to talk about skills. In an awful lot of systems, things like attributes and skills are assigned a numerical value. And in an awful lot of systems, they are assigned at least some sort of distinguishing information that indicates that you're better at this than that, or this is a strength and this is a weakness, something along those lines. And so we are rating the relative ability of a character in terms of things like physical, mental, and social characteristics, or things that they have learned or things that they have been trained in. In the Gaia complex, skills are not rated numerically. You either are trained, you are skilled in that area, or you are not. So the usual pairing of attribute plus skill is not a step that is needed to be taken here. It's just, I am skilled in that area. I have this associated attribute with that skill, and so I'm that good at it. Kind of like this. It's a compression of something, or it's an abstraction of something that may not need to be exploded out as often as it is for examination. So you either are or are not skilled in something. If you are skilled in something, it makes it possible for you to be more successful in that area than someone who is unskilled. And it reduces the likelihood of you encountering critical failure. So all of this makes a good degree of sense, and it keeps things moving. Well, there's one additional detail along the lines of things that affect what's happening and things that affect the dice that are related to skills, and that's specialties. Specialties are the way that the system provides for a reroll. And if you are skilled, and if that skill is specialized, then you can reroll one die. Now, there are other ways and other situations where a reroll might be possible, but in the system, you can only ever reroll one die once. Now, obviously, one area where we would expect to encounter more elements of system would be combat. And there will be procedures that separate combat out because they matter in that kind of situation or in that context more than they do in other situations. Things like initiative, things like distance and range. So the game is pushing role play first, and the way that the game is written carries forward the idea that our efforts as players are to bring out character and bring out challenge and conflict in order to arrive at a really exciting and good cyberpunk story. So there are opportunities taken to make it faster and to have divergence from role-played interactions between characters and description of the environment into pure system talk. There are efforts made to minimize this kind of impact so that things can be moving swiftly. So as a result, things like range are handled by zones, right? So that the assignment of any modifier can be very quick, and that we're not doing things like measuring things out on the table or figuring out if this particular firearm has sufficient range to be able to attack this particular target. Those things are abstracted out of the game entirely. Initiative is a set value determined by the character's reflexes or by their perception, and you get to choose whichever one is higher, and then to which is added the roll of 1d12. Initiative is handled in a fairly straightforward and familiar way that people might do instinctively, in that the person who rolls the highest number, they get to act first, and the person that rolls the lowest number gets to act last. Declaration is conducted in the same order. If there is a tie, then a comparison can be made, or the game master can indicate which order things are going to happen because of how the situation is playing out. To help frame when to call for rolls and what constitutes someone's turn, the game talks about actions. And while this is essentially freeform, it does provide a lot of guidance as to what type of action an action is and what are some particular goals that characters would be trying to attempt in a firefight or some other type of combat. In order to help establish the sense of boundary to a combat action or to a combat that is helpful for the players and for the game master, there are a list of actions provided. Now, we're not really confined to these actions, but going through them and describing them all, giving them context in the terms of violence, establishes the look and tone and feel, the duration, the fairly elastic nature of a combat round for this particular game. So the list of actions that are offered include anything else that is similar and appropriate. But the notion of actions within a combat round are defined in this way. We have movement actions, which have two particular maneuvers within them, which is move, or adjusting your position somewhere in the zones involved in this combat, or there's charge, right? So you're either moving around to gain some kind of advantage, or you are closing the range. Then there are supporting actions, right? Reloading, changing weapons, fixing or unjamming a weapon, providing medical aid, that kind of stuff. And then there are attack actions, which are either for close combat or for ranged combat. So by going over all of these things, the author has given us a sense of how long things should take, if there are any limitations on doing these particular things, or how far can be moved in one turn, what constitutes one action's worth of movement or charging, and that kind of thing. And once we get familiar with these, then adjudicating whatever else might come up during a combat should be easy. So let's take a look at something like reloading. A reload, if you have reloads available for your weapon, for a small weapon, will take one action. For a heavy weapon, will take two actions. Right? There's a declaration phase. I'm going to reload the heavy weapon, at which point the belt-fed ammunition or whatever else is readied, and then in the second action, the reloading is accomplished. So it's pretty straightforward. Regular handheld weapons, one action is a reload. Other larger weapons, two actions are required. Changing weapon, likewise, requires your action. So it's not timed out. There isn't a set number of seconds or a particular duration. It's that you're going to use your supporting action in order to do this. For administering medical care, this works a little differently. You can provide some kind of life-saving treatment with your action, but stabilizing the character, taking care of them, conducting field surgery, all of these sorts of things can take more time. And so this is a good example to look at to compare to the others, right? So standing up takes an action, or unjamming a weapon takes an action. But for medical care, delivering medical care takes anywhere from 3 combat rounds or more, and it's specified by the game master according to the circumstances. So doing something like injecting painkiller or clotting agent may be really quick, but field surgery, obviously, or tending to serious wounds could take longer, including the entire length of the combat. So the system doesn't downplay the seriousness of injury, and the system doesn't simply put things in, you use your action, it takes, it takes 1 round or something like that. It's at least a round, and remember what is happening first and foremost. So when we have a question about how things are to be handled, the notion is to look at the context of the situation that the characters are in first, rather than the letter of any particular rule saying this takes 1 action or this takes 1 round, right? Under normal bad circumstances, that might take 1 round, but in these particular circumstances, it could take more. And part of the vibrancy and challenge of play is leaning into this and making it real for everybody at the table. Not arbitrary decisions, not making things harder because you think they should be harder, but instead bringing the situation into vibrant life within the imagination of the participants. So if this is not a skill that a group has, a system like this might be one way in order for them to gain insight into how this play is done and have a lot of fun along the way. So how do we classify games that play this way? The game itself is telling you when you need to make a decision about a rule, or when you need to make a decision about what to do. We've gathered together to create story. We gather together to tell cool cyberpunk stories set in a really dynamic and interesting cyberpunk dystopia. What does that really mean? And what do these mechanics do to make that creation of story possible? Or how do they make that creation of story possible? And this is where I find stuff that's interesting in the game. This kind of game, there are lots of games out there that are like this, not in the specific nature of its system and its mechanisms, but in its philosophy. Now we have this notion out there that we gather together to play a role-playing game to tell or to create stories. There are some games out there which provide specific mechanisms for the players to take an actual creative role in the formation of story, like an author would or like a director would, so that they can say things like, this is where the story is going to take a turn. This is where there's a reversal of fortune. This is where there's phenomenal good luck or a surprise or something along those lines. This is where an advantage is presented, and this is what the advantage is. There are games that provide these kinds of influence on the dramatic level of play. But the Gaia complex is not that game. Instead, I find that when the author tells us that we're here to create story, he seems to be talking about decisions, and he seems to be talking about characters, and he's provided a lean and fast system which has grit and detail in the places that need grit and detail, and has abstraction in the places that need to be abstracted, which makes decisions simple, which makes lookups on the character sheet simple and fast, which focuses on, can I or can't I, should I or shouldn't I, and how. How does this character do things? Who is this character anyway? And what do they think about this world that they live in with rogue AI and with out of control corporate nation states and with a vampiric population that is out literally to get us. What are we going to do? The system at first is going to give us decisions. We're going to be looking at the rules. We're going to be thinking about, is this a good difficulty? Is this a success or not a success? Should I be able to earn some grit from that or not? We're going to be making decisions. We're going to be talking about the flow of things and whether or not it will be exciting. We might be wanting to restrict character action because it seems fun. We might be wanting to make a rule a little bit more elastic. We might be wanting to expand how long a round is because that seems interesting. We're making decisions based on how cool that particular situation, that particular imagined situation might be. But once we pass that stage, we get into the stage of simply playing the character and occupying the character's space in this fictional world, in this setting that's created, the Gaia complex. And at that point, we move fully from creating story as player to making decisions as character. We're playing in character as character, and intentionally or not, story arises from this. That is where I get excited. So this is a not as quick as I thought it would be overview of the 12.3 system, which supports the Gaia complex. Hope you find it useful. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask, and I'll see if I can answer them or find someone who can. Anyway, until the next time, take care.